Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Martine, and if you are new here, I do videos on Vedic astrology mainly, but also with some tropical insights, and I focus on both relationship and natal astrology. And if you like this video and you would like to hear more content from me, please like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell to see when I will post a new video. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics. Please check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there. Thank you. Also, as a reminder, I do also do tarot readings now, and if you're interested in finding out more about them, I can also send you some feedbacks and samples of readings that I have done so you can get an idea on what they look like exactly. But yeah, if you're interested in getting a tarot reading also, you can email me at the email in the video description. Okay, thank you. And today's video is going to be on the Mars-ruled Nakshatras. Yes, I have really postponed this one. Okay, so I'm going to start as usual. Well, first I have to do the little introduction, which is that I am going to be linking all the related videos in this video description. And you can check out the other videos that I've covered in this series. I have done Sun, Moon, Mercury, and Venus Nakshatras so far. And I'm also going to link another video that I did specifically on how to find out which nakshatras are the most relevant for you. And once again, this is not actually just about the partner. This is not specific for partner characteristics. Actually, you can also use them for yourself if you have prominent placements in these nakshatras, especially if you have the moon and or the ascendant or the sun to some extent. With the moon and the ascendant, you can actually even see these nakshatras influencing your physical appearance. And also, if you have these nakshatras prominent, especially with the moon, the sun, or the ascendant placements in the D9 divisional or the Navamsha, these nakshatras are going to be particularly influential for you, especially if you are over the age of 35, at which point the Navamsha becomes really active. Okay, or if you're married, at which point, again, the Navamsha is activated. Okay, so this was a short introduction. And now to start with the little description on what exactly Mars stands for. It's really interesting because Mars and Venus, they're almost like night and day. You can't really define one without the other. Sort of, that's the way that I would see it, because Mars rules Aries and Scorpio, and Venus rules the opposite signs, which are Taurus and Libra. And it's really interesting here, and you will get to see how paradoxical and how complex nakshatras are, because oftentimes, you know, they're counterintuitive in their influence. Some characteristics that you would say maybe are typical of Venus might show up in a Mars-dominated nakshatras and vice versa. So it's not as clear as of a division between Mars and Venus as you would see in tropical astrology. Okay, it's not like Mars rules all things masculine and Venus rules all things feminine. At least not according to the definitions of feminine and masculine that are seen as generally socially acceptable. Let me put it like that, okay? But that being said, what is the Mars energy? Okay, so Mars is the warrior archetype, okay? We all have a Mars placement. Mars rules, you know, things like the physical body. It actually rules the muscle mass, and therefore it rules pretty much the entire physical body. It rules the head, the skull, the eyes, everything that has to do with the head, actually. It rules also the blood. In medical astrology, it also rules masculine energy and therefore masculine hormones like testosterone. And it also rules things to do with survival, like the adrenal glands and all this stuff that have to do, anything that has to do with the fight or flight responses. And this is all in the realm of medical astrology so far, but it's important for you to understand. Okay, so it rules anything to do with the sacral chakra. It rules anything to do with survival, with fighting for what you want. It's basically proactive, okay? It's the warrior slash hunter archetype. Mars is the part of us that is going to step in to defend and to fight for the things that we care about and what we want. It's the part of us that is the go-getter, the part of us that is proactive, okay? So the difference between Mars and Venus, for instance, the difference between people who are Mars dominant and people who are Venus dominant is that Mars is generally going to take the direct route, okay? Not only that, but Mars actually thrives on challenges, okay? That is a huge fundamental difference between Venus and Mars, is that Mars not only enjoys challenges, but actually needs challenges, okay? The Mars dominant person cannot really be fulfilled in life without overcoming obstacles, without taking on challenges, because this is how they measure their strength and their willpower, which is an integral part of their mission if they are very strong in Mars energy, okay, in this lifetime. So people who have prominent Mars placements, their job in this life is to cultivate their willpower. It's to measure themselves constantly by comparing themselves with the obstacles ahead, okay, with the things that are standing in between them and what they want to achieve. The difference is that Venus dominant people, they can also be very oriented towards especially material ambitions. However, Venus is always going to take the path of least resistance, okay? So they're going to take a roundabout way of doing things, okay? This is the general description. Of course, when you get into nakshatras, things get a little bit more complicated, as you're going to see as I go along, okay? But yeah, this is pretty much Mars in a nutshell. And another thing that I wanted to mention, which I have heard one time an astrologer say, I'm pretty sure I think it was Dr. Pi, but I'm not 100% sure. He said something about, he was talking about, I think, Mars in astrology, and he said something about how Mars connected to the warrior archetype, is giving people this desire to have a glorious, he basically said, what does a warrior want most of all? And the way that he put it was that what a warrior wants most of all is a glorious death, which really stuck with me. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that people who are Mars dominant have some kind of strong death wish, but the point here is that Mars is that part that is willing to die for what it believes, for what it wants, for what it stands for. Things like honor, things like loyalty are important here. That's another thing. Like, again, I'm going to talk about this in a whole separate video about gender and astrology. At some point, I'm going to do this video because I've been thinking about doing it for a while. But basically, the main difference between, let's say, the so-called masculine planets and the feminine planets is that the masculine planets like Mars, they're all about reason, they're also about principles, and they're also to some extent about giving, actually, because it's outwardly oriented energy, okay, versus the feminine energy, which is inwardly oriented and it's more receptive, okay. So the Mars archetype also, this is why Mars links to logic, okay, it's connected to logic, it's connected to our ability to survive in stressful situations, because logic is about solving problems in real time. Logic is about getting things done, right? And all of these things are actually ruled by Mars, okay? This is why people who have strong Mars influence are very, very logical, because they only care about real challenges in real time. And it's not like maybe that's not perfectly said. It's not like they only care about these things, but this is one of their main lessons in life, okay? Being in crisis situations, solving crisis situations, coming up with solutions. All of these things fall under the domain of Mars. Mars also rules athleticism. This is why it rules combat of any form, warfare of any form, things to do with survival and all this stuff. Engineering, it rules also the medical sciences, especially the parts of medicine that have to do with the physical body. Could be physical therapists, could be things to do with the head, again, like neurosurgeon, anything to do with the head, ear, nose, and throat doctors, dentists, ophthalmologists, etc., etc. Okay, so this is what Mars rules in general. And yeah, this is pretty much the general thing that I can say about Mars. Now I'm going to get into the Mars-ruled Nakshatras, sorry. So the first of them, Mrigashira. Okay, Mrigashira is interesting because together with Ardra, there is a theme here of chasing I'm not going to get into, maybe I'm going to get into the legend a little bit when I get to the Ardra Nakshatra. I don't want to get into it right now, to be honest, whatever. But there is a theme here of, according to the legends that are associated with this nakshatra, of a hunt happening in a forest, okay? So Mrigashira is connected to forests, okay? That's something that I wanted, that just came in my head right now. But I'm going to get into general descriptions to stay on track, okay? So Mrigashira, actual translation for Mrigashira is deer's head or the benevolent, okay? A symbol is a deer's head. The symbol associated with this nakshatra is a deer's head. The animal yoni, remember I mentioned this in other videos, the animal yoni has to do with the instinctive side of a person, and it is particularly relevant in sexual compatibility. And the animal yoni is female snake for this nakshatra. Planets which are associated with it, aside from the fact that the ruling planet of the nakshatra is Mars, there's also some influence of Venus and Mercury because it falls in between Taurus and Gemini, okay? That's another thing that I probably should have mentioned. It's spanning from 23 degrees, 20 minutes Taurus to 6 degrees, 20 minutes Gemini, in sidereal zodiac, okay? I have also written the tropical equivalent on the screen. The gender is neutral, which is interesting. So it's neither masculine or feminine. The nature is deva and godlike. Again, I have mentioned about the natures, or the I think they're called ganas. And it's really interesting to note here that Mrigashira is the only deva or godlike nakshatra that is ruled by Mars. The other ones, Chitra and Danishta, are both rakshasas, which are demon nakshatras, which makes them a lot more fierce in energy, okay? The devas are basically more innocent, more benevolent, and you're going to see this with the energy of this nakshatra, especially if you also pay close attention to the examples that I will show on the screen. And you will tend to see that a lot of these people have very similar energy and oftentimes are actually quite, I would say a lot of them come across as have this really straightforward, kind of innocent sort of energy about them, which is typical. The straightforwardness is typical for Mars. Mars doesn't like to beat around the bush. But with this nakshatra especially, it's really interesting because they have this kind of innocence about them because of the deva influence. Okay, and also because I think because of the whole deer relatedness, okay, the connection to the deer as an animal. The tree associated with it is Milmesha. I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right. Acacia katechu or something like that. I am going to post a photo of it. I think it's interesting to show the tree because, again, if you look at the trees, if you think of the animals and the trees associated with this nakshatra, these nakshatras, it really helps to give a better vision of the energy that is associated with these particular people and, you know, the nakshatra and the mythology of it. The animal or bird associated with it, another one, the bird associated is the hen. Okay, the color associated is silver gray. And yes, so general things that I can say about Mrigashira, okay? These people, first of all, this is probably one of the most, I would say the best word to describe them is curious, okay? They're probably the most curious nakshatra. They're most inquisitive, okay? They have a massive thirst for knowledge. This nakshatra is particularly associated with anything that would fall under research / detective work. Okay, so which is interesting because you would think, okay, that's Scorpio energy. Not exactly, okay. Because again, Scorpio, the reason Scorpio is intense and connected to research and getting to the bottom of things is also partly because it's ruled by Mars, just as this nakshatra is ruled by Mars. So that's how I would associate Mars with the influence that it has on this nakshatra, okay? So yes, this nakshatra more than anything has a strong desire. So I've seen this a lot with people who have prominent Mrigashira, especially in the Navamsha. I've seen it where these are people who love detective work, like detective stories or anything to do with research, but especially things like thrillers and, you know, murder mysteries and stuff like that. But anything to do with research and where they have to get to the bottom of something, that's something they will love. They also have a very strong need for intellectual stimulation. They can be very mentally active, which can turn out to be a problem for them, especially if they don't balance it out with regular exercise. So the way to balance it out is by incorporating some regular exercise, especially getting out in nature. This is particularly beneficial for them. Okay. They also have a tendency to be restless and really adventurous. Okay. Another thing is they have a really good sense of humor. And another, let me think, right, in terms of qualities that they have, is that they can have a very strong sense of individuality. They can be very, very quick learners. So again, these are people who, I actually know someone in my family who has Moon in Mrigashira in the 8th house. And can I just say that, like, I mean, this woman is like the eye of Sauron. She's like, she doesn't miss anything, like in terms of details. Like if you would give this woman a task, it's only a matter of time before she, you know, solves it. Figures out something. She is self-taught. She's incredibly intelligent, etc. And yeah, I mean, and again, I'm not basing my entire perception of this nakshatra based on one person, but I happen to know a person who has this nakshatra very prominently placed. And yeah, another thing is really interesting with this nakshatra, the connection to forests and natural environments and animals. And this person attracts animals like a magnet. I've never seen something like it. Like animals will just flock to her whenever she meets, like, you know, like you'll be walking down the street and some random dog is just going to come up to her and like, you know, start being friendly. Another interesting thing is that Mrigashira is connected to forests and forestry. And this person, her grandfather was a forester, and she used to talk about how he would bring little baby wolves to her house when she was a child and all this stuff. Yeah, these are just things that I, you know, came up to me while I was thinking about Mrigashira. But in general, yes, this nakshatra is connected to forestry. So in terms of interest, in terms of professions, they will love any kind of profession that, first of all, is intellectual. It's intellectually stimulating. These people, again, much like any kind of Mars, well, yeah, much like the rest of the Mars dominant nakshatras, they need challenges. They need, especially with this nakshatra, especially intellectual challenges. So they will need a profession that keeps them mentally active and occupied, because otherwise they can, you know, the mental activity that they have can turn against them. They can start to be overly suspicious. That's another thing. They can be very suspicious with this nakshatra. They will try to twist everything. You know, they'll turn a situation on every facet, to look at every facet. And, you know, when someone proposes them anything, they'll just turn the situation on every side and think, why would they say that? Maybe they mean this, maybe they mean that. You know, could it be that maybe they want this? So, and again, I've seen this with a lot of Mrigashira strong people. They can be extremely, yeah, suspicious. There's no other way to put it, you know, because of their, I guess a less nicer way to put it would be even paranoid. but I wouldn't go as far as that. But let's just say they do have a tendency to be highly suspicious, okay? Because they're constantly, thinking about every possibility, every course of action that they could take, etc., etc., any potential hidden meaning behind the surface of things. This is why they're very good at research, okay? Aside from that, right, they can be, let me think, they can be really, also they can be very optimistic and hopeful. That is a positive side, unless this nakshatra turns negative. Generally, they're quite hopeful, and I would say they're quite innocent. Okay, the people that I met with this nakshatra, quite, how should I put it? I would say, I have a kind of a soft spot for Mars dominant individuals in general. And contrary to popular belief, the Mars dominant crowd is actually, I would say, quite harmless is not the right word, but they're very, what you see is what you get. It's usually, especially with this nakshatra, people are pretty straightforward. They don't pretend to be something they're not. Worst case scenario, you could come across people who maybe hide facets of themselves, okay? But they won't go to the extent where they actually put on a false persona or a false facade to keep, someone interested or something like that. So yeah, I mean, they can be really innocent in that sense. They can also be very sensitive, and generally, again, counterintuitive to a Mars dominant nakshatra, they're actually very peaceful. Okay, so these are people who are like, they're gonna go for world peace. And they're generally gonna be kind to pretty much everyone. Also, this nakshatra, funny enough, I would say all of the Mars dominant nakshatras, connected to performance. They can enjoy singing, especially speaking, so they can have professions that are use a lot of voice. Professions where they are required to speak a lot, like being a professor or something like that. And they can also be very good at debates and arguments. Okay, so yeah, I don't know if I would necessarily connect this nakshatra with the profession of a lawyer. I think that you would have to see other influences there. But they do make very good debaters, very good at arguments. Okay. And another thing that I will say is this is again pretty true for all of the Mars dominant nakshatras. They're quite action oriented. Okay, so these are people in general, all of the Mars dominant nakshatras actually, that are not going to wait around for things to happen. Okay, they're going to be proactive about what it is that they want. And they understand that they have to be brave and overcome their fears. The negative side of this nakshatra is sometimes they can be really scattered. They can be a little bit disorganized. This is especially true if this nakshatra becomes a little bit, let's say, imbalanced. Like I mentioned, if they become overly cerebral, for instance, and they never blow off steam by exercising, they can, fall into some of these really darker expressions, which is something like borderline paranoid. Also becoming really scattered, especially mentally, like they can't get their focus together. They can also be very critical. And one of the worst parts about this nakshatra is actually, and I have unfortunately seen this, that they can be very critical of others, but not so much of themselves. And I think maybe to this again, to some extent is true for all of the Mars dominant nakshatras and even for all of the Mars dominant people. To some extent, there is, let's say, higher than average tendency for them to be, too critical of others, but they may criticize others for behaviors that they have themselves, if that makes sense. Okay, so they're not so self-aware, let me put it like that. They can also be very commitment phobic, I would say, especially for the men who have this influence, this nakshatra in, high influence in their chart. Definitely they can be commitment phobic. They can be a little bit of a libertine. Not wanting to settle down. So, especially if you're a woman interested in a man who has this placement, it's potentially useful. But again, this is something of the positive side of the Mars dominant nakshatras and people in general, is that they're very difficult to pin down. They're difficult to win over. But once you do win them over, they generally are very loyal. Okay, so they're very because these are the kind of people that they want partners they can really respect. So once you have really won their respect and you have won their appreciation, most likely they're going to be by your side for a very long time. They will be loyal to you, and they're not going to give up easily on a partner or a relationship. Okay, once you get to that point. But this is another crucial difference between the Mars dominant influence and the Venus dominant influence, for instance, because with the Venus dominant, it's, they can be nice, they can be friendly, but they actually hold back emotionally, internally. They actually don't give in, to other people, but they seem like they give in to other people. So Venus dominant people can be way more manipulative in that sense. No offense. We're talking archetypes here. But yeah, that's a general thing that I have noticed. Whereas, the Mars dominant is, what you see is what you get once again. So they're going to come across as tough, and they generally are tough. They're tougher to win over, but once you win them over, it's going to last a lot longer. The connection is going to last a lot longer, most likely. Okay. So potential professions connected to this nakshatra, like I mentioned, anything to do with research positions. Could be teaching, could be a lot of things. Anything involved with music, writing, even poets, painters, something like that. So any artistic profession. And could also be people connected to, again, could be conservationists, foresters, farmers, people working with nature, veterinary doctors, or, things to do with animal conservation. Cartographers is another thing. Also, this nakshatra is very adventurous. So you can see travelers, you can see explorers. You can even see astrologers and clairvoyants with this. And I think I mentioned teachers. And in my experience, what I have also seen is just anyone in STEM fields. Like, these people can be very logical. They tend to be really good at math, as far as I've seen. Maybe not all of them, of course. You can't generalize. There are certain configurations, actually, to see when a person is really good at math. But I have seen Mrigashiras and all of the Mars dominant nakshatras to be quite practical, because, again, Mars is about survival, it's about practical abilities, it's about, getting things done. So generally, they will have basic logical thinking no matter what profession they are in. So they tend to be pretty, down to earth and logical, really. Okay, but they're good. They have amazing intuition. Like, these people can have really good intuition. They have that sixth sense going on, especially when this person, like, if you know a person with prominent Mrigashira, and they'll tell you something like, I have a feeling that something bad is gonna happen, or I have a feeling that this person's no good, you should listen to them. Okay. You should listen to them, because they have that ability to just have amazing intuition. Okay, some famous Mrigashiras, except for the people that I have already shown on the screen, are Shirley Temple, Brooke Shields, Rodin, Doris Day, Goldie Hawn. Okay. Yeah, so this has been pretty much it for Mrigashira. And moving on to the next Mars-ruled nakshatra, which is Chitra. Translation into brilliant or bright. The symbol for Chitra is a bright jewel or a shining light. The animal yoni, once again, which is very important for intimate compatibility, is the female tiger. The nature is Rakshasa or demon, like I mentioned. Gender is male. The tree associated with the sacred garlic pear. Again, I'm going to butcher this one. Kraterva Crateva religiosa. I don't know if this is right. Okay, this is the botanical name for the tree. I am going to post the tree again because I think they're really interesting, and a lot of these trees are very, very interesting that I found associated with nakshatras. Okay, the bird associated is woodpecker. The color associated with this nakshatra is black. Planets which are relevant, aside from Mars, which is the ruler, again, are Mercury and Libra because it falls in Virgo and Libra. It spans from 23 degrees, 20 minutes Virgo to 6 degrees, 40 minutes Libra. And you can also see the tropical equivalent on the screen. Okay, so Chitra. This is a nakshatra. First of all, can I just say, speaking strictly about partner archetypes here, this is a nakshatra, especially if you're a man and you have Venus in Chitra, especially in Libra, in the Libra segment. If it's in Virgo, it's a little bit tricky, but I won't get into that. I mean, if you want more details on that, you can watch my video on Venus as the wife in a man's chart. But yes, in the Libra segment, if you have Venus in Chitra, this is going to bring you this really gorgeous wife archetype, or girlfriend, maybe not necessarily wife. Basically the kind of woman that all the men are going to envy you for. So Chitra really makes a woman, especially for women, but men as well. They, I mean, if you look at the examples that I have posted on the screen, and you will see for yourself, like, this tends to make really good looking, healthy looking people. And for women especially, makes women, be the full package in terms of physical appearance, so they have a nice body and they have a very pretty face as well. But especially with this nakshatra, actually, and I have also mentioned this, in the video, I think, where I talked about Aruda Lagna and Karakamsha, I talked about Charles Manson, and his chart, I think, had prominent placements. I'm pretty sure it was Manson, had prominent placements in Chitra, and I mentioned there that this nakshatra is connected to glamour. Okay, so this makes a person attracted to everything that is shiny and bright. This is basically the nakshatra that needs to hear the saying, not all that glitters is gold, because they really sometimes tend to fall for that. They will just care so much about appearances, care so much about why? Because they're very visual. And I know it's kind of like a cliche, especially when it comes to men, that men are visual. They're probably on average more visual than women, but talking on, on an astrological basis here, Chitras as people are very visual. And this is why they care so much about appearance, which can have, both good and bad consequences, right? Because, on the one hand, especially if you're looking for a partner who is well put together, takes care of themselves, this could even create people who are obsessed with diets. They're so, you can see people obsessed with tanning, or even nowadays with plastic surgery. So most likely I would expect this nakshatra to be prominent in the charts of women who become addicted to plastic surgery, or or women who just care a lot about their bodies, like they want to stay in shape and they put a lot of effort into it. They, these women who are like doing intense yoga and maybe going to tanning salons when they're, in their 60s and 70s and maybe beyond that, because I've seen a few examples of these kinds of women. I would expect those women to have prominent Chitra placements. Okay, so they're all about the glamour, they're all about the body, and also Mars, I did mention this, Mars is connected to the body, the athleticism. So, especially in Chitra, you see a lot of people who are obsessed with their bodies, like they want to have nice bodies. And face as well, but especially the shape of the body is important to them. Chitra is also just connected to, like I said, because it's very visual, connected to patterns, to things like architecture. Once again, this is a nakshatra that breeds people who are good at math, they're good at pattern spotting. I would say particularly good at geometry and things to do with anything visual. Think of any profession or line of interest that requires a lot of attention to visual expression. That's somewhere that you will find a Chitra, or those are things that Chitras will be interested in, like fashion design, photography, filmmaking. Let me put it. Let me think. Yes, form, beauty, art, structure, anything like that. Okay. And basically, for lack of a better word, this is one of the sexy nakshatras, okay? Especially the Libra segments. Not to say that the Virgos are not good looking. It's just that the Virgos tend to be a little bit more, toned down. They're less focused on the glamour, let's say. They also seek harmony and perfection in general. So again, sculptures, you can see sculptures with displacement. I mean, anything, like I said, painters, photographers, anything that is visual. So they are obsessed with perfection. They are obsessed with harmony. Unfortunately, the downside of this nakshatra is that they can easily become imbalanced. Like they can, on their quest to achieving perfection in beauty and art and form, they can fall into imbalance and become downright fanatic, worst case scenario, like I mentioned with the Charles Manson example in that video. They can fall into, becoming obsessed as well. And another potential dark side of this nakshatra is that they can hide their anger very well. So these are people that on the surface, can come across as very nice and very polite and very diplomatic, charming, whatever, but inside they could be boiling, they could be seething with anger. And usually the kind of anger that you see here comes from some level of frustration, like they're not achieving things fast enough, they're not being appreciated, they're not getting enough attention or something like that. All of the Mars dominant nakshatras, to be fair, care about things like personal glory, right? Because again, like I mentioned, the archetype of the warrior is that they want to have a glorious death. And this is especially true for Danishtas. I'm going to get to them at the end. But in all of the nakshatras, in all of the Mars influence in general in a chart, this is true, okay? So they will tend to be very ambitious go-getters. So what happens is that when they, come into repeated obstacles, they start to become frustrated. And especially since Mars is very physical, very, oriented towards, combat, and it rules, like the male energy and all that. This can make a person prone to outbursts of anger that are quite nasty and unexpected, because they're, in this nakshatra in particular, they're very good at covering up their anger on the surface. Okay, so that was something that was worth mentioning. And so some of the typical qualities that you would expect were a person with prominent Chitra placements are sociability, independence. They can be really high-spirited, they can be really dignified, elegant, generally perceived as attractive, very well dressed because they do care about appearances. They can also be very business savvy. The dark side of Chitra is they can be arrogant, they can be egocentric, they can be very easily bored, especially in romance. They can also be argumentative, judgmental, similar to Mrigashira. And, well, to be fair, again, these two qualities are probably quite common in all the Mars dominant energies. They can also tend to be negligent, and the really dark side about this particular nakshatra is they really can be unethical. Okay, like in their pursuit for particular goals. And typical professions that you would expect to see for the Chitra dominant folk are architect, designer, sculptor, fashion designer, photographer, composer, interior decorators, feng shui or vastu experts, inventors, even landscapers, painters, performers of any kind, people working in advertising, herbalists, and generally anything that requires a lot of versatility. Okay, some famous examples, except from all of the ones that I have shown on the screen, are Richard Chamberlain and Marie Antoinette. I mean, I'm just gonna drop it. Sidney Poitier as well. Okay, so yeah, this has been the Chitra Nakshatra, and now moving on to the next one, which is Danishta, the last but not least of the Mars dominant nakshatras, translates into the wealthiest and the most famous. Symbol associated is a musical drum. Animal associated, animal yoni, is the female lion. And nature is Rakshasa. Once again, I mentioned female lion. This is particularly interesting. It's of particular interest in intimate compatibility. However, I really do urge you to consider the animals associated with these nakshatras, because they do give a lot of insight. And if you actually look at the examples that I have found for each nakshatra, to me, like, the energy of the people comes across is actually pretty similar in some characteristics to the animals associated with these nakshatras. Okay, so like, for instance, if you look at Danishtas, they tend to have this kind of like energy that is kind of feline, laid back. Like, the expression in their eyes is kind of like, kind of a lazy sort of, energy, and they tend to have like these wide set eyes and kind of relaxed features, like pretty strong jawline. I don't know, to me it seems okay. Some people might say that I'm stretching it, but to me the animal associated with the nakshatra is pretty relevant. Okay, so yeah, it's the female lion. And nature Rakshasa, gender female. This time there's not a bird, but there's an insect associated with the nakshatra, and it's the golden bee. Okay, which is interesting because here's another thing with these animals associated. The bee and the lion, the female lion, are, both associated with hard work. And this is a characteristic that you will oftentimes find Danishtas have. Okay, they tend to be really hardworking, especially since part of it falls in Capricorn. Okay, the tree is the Indian mesquite. Prosopis cineraria or something like that. I hope, again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, the botanical name. And again, the tree is interesting to look at and think about the vibe that it gives off, and it's associated with this particular it can somehow express the energy of this nakshatra, I think. Okay, it's pretty grand to me, and Danishta is the wealthiest, the most famous. This is a nakshatra that really attracts a lot of attention and often brings great fame. That's why it's called the most famous. Okay, color, similar to Mrigashira, is silver gray. The presiding, I haven't mentioned the presiding deities, but I think I have written them on the screen. The presiding deities for Danishta are the 8 Vasus, the solar gods of energy and light. Okay, and related planets aside from Mars, Saturn, which is the ruler, is the co-ruler of Aquarius. It's interesting because Danishta spans from 23 degrees, 20 minutes Capricorn to 6 degrees, 40 minutes Aquarius. I would say there's quite a difference between the segment that is in Aquarius and the segment that is in Capricorn. Because, most astrologers see this nakshatra as influenced by, co-influenced by Saturn. However, Aquarius is also co-ruled by Rahu, and I think that really shows in the Aquarius segment, because those people they tend to be a little bit more unconventional, whereas in the Capricorn segment, It's just people who are extremely hardworking. So especially think about the fact that Mars in Capricorn is exalted. Okay, so Mars is happiest in Capricorn. This is its favorite environment. And so people who have Mars in Capricorn, in Danishta, which is ruled by Mars, have an extremely strong Mars energy. Okay, so they are going to particularly embody the energy of this nakshatra, which is very hardworking, very driven to achieve, because Capricorn, once again, is connected to social status, climbing the social ladder and getting, how should I put it, conventional success, okay? Socially acceptable success. Okay, so it's also, so this star is connected to natural music ability, good sense of rhythm, and good sense of timing. Okay, very adventurous, very insightful. They also are very generous, and they're also very capable of uniting people for a common purpose. Okay, so they can be very inspirational. In Danishta, really more than the other nakshatras that are ruled by Mars, I have seen a lot of ambition. Like, these people are extremely hardworking, and they don't try to hide the fact that they're heading for the top. You know, like they're not even trying to play modest. It's not a bad thing necessarily. A lot of them can be extremely talented, and again, all you have to do is look at the examples that I have posted. They can be extremely talented in the arts, which is quite surprising. You would not expect that from a Mars nakshatra, but they are very talented. They're very, very creative, especially fields to do with dancing and music. They will tend to excel in performing arts. And again, I have heard this from other astrologers, and I also have noticed it, that Danishtas, especially Danishta women, tend to be, first of all, they tend to be really good looking. That is also true. It's not so much necessarily super sexual or super hot, the way that Chitra would be, not in the super overtly glamorous way, because here you have the influence of Saturn, which kind of cools down a little bit. So I wouldn't see Danishta as like some kind of a, how should I put it, bombshell energy necessarily, as I've heard some people refer to Danishta that way. I wouldn't necessarily say that. However, it does, especially for women, it tends to make them sometimes objectified, I will say, but objectified is maybe not the best word. It does make people just see them as good looking and maybe nothing more than that, because they tend to be very good looking. Okay, so with this nakshatra, especially since it is ruled by Mars, which is the physical body, especially, they tend to have a really nice body. Okay, so all of these nakshatras, to be honest, tend to be pretty physical, and they have something to do with, the physical body and athleticism and all that. But in Danishta especially, and women who have a prominent Danishta placement, it makes them kind of be known for their bodies, okay? And yeah, that's something that I kind of wanted to mention as a parenthesis. Another thing that I have noticed is these people also are connected to things like defense, the military, again, because you have the combination of Saturn and Mars, which is typical for things like athleticism. Again, I've also seen this nakshatra prominent in people who are really interested in any form of combat, like martial arts, even things like self-defense training, whatever, anything that falls under this, fighting and combat, like, physical combat, basically. Also things to do with weaponry and all this stuff. So anything to do with the military, with defense, can also be connected to Danishta. I've seen this a lot. And in fact, the drum, the musical drum that is the associated symbol, I would say part of that is because of the connection to dancing, which in itself is another thing that is very physical. It's about rhythm. But it's also something that is very connected to the military, right? Because throughout the ages, when people would go into battle, there would be something like an accompanying, drum or musical instrument. Usually it was a drum, right? Because the drum is it's that kind of like conjuring how should I put it, the aggressive feelings of people, I think. So yeah, like drum is associated with this nakshatra, I think, because of the connection to military and because of the connection of marching in the military and all that stuff. And yeah, those are things that I have noticed. The general strengths of people who have prominent Danishta placements, that they definitely tend to be very ambitious. They tend to be also very insightful, very generous. And one thing about this nakshatra is they might actually do better in foreign lands than in their own countries. They also can live on both a spiritual and material level. This is an interesting thing with Danishta because, again, especially with the women who tend to be pretty good looking, people don't really appreciate the fact that they're actually very intelligent. Okay, so, and not just intelligent, but actually spiritual. Like, they can have a really spiritual perspective. And again, I have mentioned this at some point in the video, that really in this nakshatra, the archetype of the warrior, of wanting to have a glorious death, is particularly prominent. And unfortunately, I have heard, and again, I don't want to scare people or something. This is something that I heard from another astrologer, that actually from several astrologers, that Danishta placements tend to show people who die young, or like they, but again, this depends. I mean, yes, if you look for some famous examples, you will find some famous examples who die young, but it's interesting because all of these examples were people who are very famous, they were, so, I mean, basically, if you're a Danishta and you don't want to die young, then try not to be famous. Like, I know that sounds really negative, but pretty much it's like, I think the reason why they die young is somehow connected to their fame. Like, they reach a level of fame and then they die at the height of it, which actually makes them even more famous, or it makes the fame last for much longer after their death. And I think it's like, and again, maybe this is stretching it, but on some level, if you believe this idea that we're all born into a certain life because we have chosen the experience, maybe on some subconscious level, Danishtas actually want this. They want a glorious death. They want to have a fame that echoes into eternity. I mean, again, that's stretching it a little bit, but yes, there is some connection between early deaths and especially tragedy, actually. So not just early death, but could be, somehow the death is somehow suspicious or is shrouded in mystery or something like that, which just, builds even higher levels of fame around the person. Okay. Also, they can be very sincere. On the dark side, they can be too sincere. I also laughed when I realized that both Mulder and Scully are Danishtas, like, which makes sense. Of course they were both lions. Like, that's why they had such good chemistry on the X-Files. Anyway, yeah. But yeah, they can be too sincere. They can be rough, okay? This is another, like I mentioned, it is a Rakshasa or a demon, which means that it has a more fierce energy. They can be really blunt. They can be really coarse. Worst case scenarios, they can just be casually rude. Okay. Another thing is, of course, good at music and dancing. Anything to do with music and dancing. They will love history. They can be, again, like the rest of the Mars nakshatras, really good at research. And they can also be good at astrology. Okay. And general weaknesses that you can find are aggressiveness. like, by the way, this nakshatra that, as far as I've noticed, truly they have this constant need to pursue something or to be doing something. Okay, so they're very active. And yes, this is probably where the aggressiveness comes from, because as soon as they reach a little bit of frustration, they start to, become frustrated, and then they keep burying the frustration under, a rug. And yeah, they can tend to be really aggressive because of that. They can also come across as inconsiderate, selfish. Worst case scenario, they can become deceptive. Okay, and even narcissistic. Another just overall term is short-tempered. They can have a temper. Okay, I actually know people who have placements in Danishta, so I can confirm that with the short-temperedness. I mean, another bad thing, and again, I have seen this to be true, is that they have a tendency, especially with Moon and Danishta. I've seen this with a few people, that they tend to be attracted to people who are wrong for them, and then convince themselves that this is the love of their life, but they tend to be wrong. Okay, like, these kinds of situations where everyone is going to tell them like that person is the wrong person, but they will stubbornly cling to that. They can also be very driven by lust, because, well, Mars and Saturn. Okay, yeah, and unbridled masculine energy, quote unquote. Okay, so professions connected to Danishta, anything to do with music and musicians, engineering and science, dancing, again, researchers, doctors, surgeons. Basically, with Mars, like any kind of profession that is high challenging, requires logic, is a decent fit. Okay, as long as it's not completely boring, that's what they like. Real estate could also be good at real estate and property management. Researchers, did I mention? I think I mentioned it. Physicists, can also be songwriters, athletes, military, like I mentioned, connected to military, and holistic healers. Okay, yeah. So, okay, this has been pretty much it, and I hope you have enjoyed it. And if you have, please like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell to see when I will post a new video. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, astrology, or tarot, please check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there. Thank you.